Hello, everyone, and welcome to Registrar Corp's webinar entitled U.S. FDA Unique Device Identifier Requirements. My name is Clay Blondin, a marketing specialist at Registrar Corp and today's moderator. The presentation will conclude with a live questions and answer session. If we run out of time, we are also happy to respond to your questions by email. You may submit a written question anytime during the webinar by using the Ask a Question feature in the top center of your webinar screen. A recorded copy of this presentation will be sent to all registrants. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Marco Theobald holds a PhD in biology from the Justus Liebig Universität Gießen in Gießen, Germany. Mr. Theobald worked in a cancer research laboratory for 7 years. He joined Registrar Corp in 2009 and is the director of the Medical Device and Drug Division. Mirna Calero acts as Registrar Corp's Medical Device Division Manager. She has been with Registrar Corp since 2010. Together with their team, Mr. Theobald and Ms. Calera have assisted thousands of medical device clients with US FDA regulations. Their areas of expertise include unique device identifier regulations, detention assistance, and electronic medical device reporting submissions. I'd like to go ahead and begin. Ms. Calera?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So today's topics for the webinar are going to be our general overview of UDI, GUDID, the regulations present, past, and future. We will also be discussing Class 1 and unclassified devices. We'll discuss Class 2 compliance dates, extensions for certain devices, new device identifier, changes that require use of a new DI. We'll be discussing kits, convenient kits, or if it's not a convenience kit. We'll also discuss of news that we have, for example, the upcoming registration for 2020 and the monitor system. Unique device identifier. FDA issued a final rule on September 24, 2013, which requires most medical devices to carry a unique device identifier, UDI. UDIs are intended to identify a device through the entire distribution chain. Key benefits of the UDI system. More accurate reporting of adverse events, more effective management of device recalls, more robust post-market surveillance for pre-market clearance and approved devices, rapid and precise identification of devices, enhanced analysis of devices on the market, and support and secure a global distribution chain. These are all key benefits that FDA has pointed out for the UDI system. Now we're going to discuss who is responsible to follow this regulation and comply with this regulation. That would be the labeler. And here we have the FDA's definition of a labeler. And it's a person who causes a label to be applied to the device or what causes the label to be modified. This is very, very important when deciding on who's going to be responsible to comply with this regulation. Keep in mind that the labeler is the one that is responsible, and it would be the one that actually makes changes to the label, that their brand, their name is on the label as the owner of that brand. In most instances, the label would be the manufacturer, but it can also be a specification developer, a single-use device reprocessor, a convenience kit assembler, a repackager, or a relabeler. These are all some examples of when you could also be a labeler, even though you are just the manufacturer. But if you own that brand, you are also the labeler. Not a labeler. FDA has not really put out a whole list out there to say, oh, these are situations where you're not a labeler. This is the best we have right now. The addition of a name or contact information for a person that distributes the product, for example, distributed by. If you don't own that brand, you're only distributing it for the actual brand owner, you are not a labeler. This is an example of a linear barcode, a UDI compliant barcode. Here you can see the two portions that make it a UDI. The first portion being the device identifier, and the second, the production identifier. So what makes a UDI? What makes a UDI is a device identifier plus the production identifier. The device identifier, as previously shown as the first portion of the UDI, is a mandatory fixed portion that identifies the labeler and the specific version or model of the device. For example, it will identify the labeler owner, that company, and what model this is. What is this product? That's the first portion. The second would be the production. The production is a variable portion of the UDI that identifies one or more of the following. For example, a serial number, an expiration date, or when was it manufactured. These are all examples of production identifiers, and these can change, of course, during the process of production. Here we have more examples of barcodes. Previously, we showed you the linear barcode, which is the most common, but we also here have the matrix barcode that sometimes are very helpful with smaller labels. You would consult with the company providing you the barcodes on which one would be best for you. UDI Barcode is a standardized system to create unique device identifier. FDA accredited the issuing agencies. Issuing agencies develop the labeler codes for the UDIs. They may also use characters and numbers. Labelers select issuing agencies to provide their UDIs. So you would have to go to an issuing agency to obtain them. There are 3 accredited issuing agencies. The first one here is GS1. We also, FDA accredited HIPIC is the Health Industry Business Communications Council, and ICBA. We know that for ICBA is definitely more for blood banking, but they are also accredited by FDA. So you have the option to contact any of these 3 companies to help you obtain the UDI. Implementation of the UDI regulation. Implementation, when FDA put this out, was to be phased first with the highest risk medical devices having to comply, then the lower risk. And some of the lower risk are actually exempt from all the requirements or some of the requirements. The DEI portion of the UDI and specific device information will be submitted and stored into a public database called the Global Unique Device Identifier Database, GUDID. The PI portion of the UDI is not submitted to FDA. This information is on record at the labeler's establishment. As we previously discussed, this is the information that will be changing based on your production. So FDA does not ask for that to be submitted to the GUDID. Since this was phased out into different dates, here you can see all the different phases. This started in 2014 with the Class 3. We are now in 2019, and as you can see, the Class 1 devices at first needed to comply by 2018, but FDA has granted an extension for September 24, 2020. So FDA has made changes on the compliance dates to better help the labeler comply. The FDA does understand it is a complex regulation at times, so they have provided extensions on that. Where to place the UDI? This is actually a very common question that we receive, but it's actually very simple. FDA is only ask for it to be on the label, and they ask for two things. It must be machine readable and human readable. So you have to have the barcode, and either right below the barcode, the number should be written out. And it could go anywhere on the label. In some situations, of course, for certain devices, it will be required for it to be on the device itself. Direct marking, for example, the device intended to be used more than once and reprocessed before each use. This is direct marking, and it could be easily readable plain text on the actual device. The UDI is also applied to the base package and higher levels of packaging. So in certain situations, you will have several UDIs for one of the devices based on the packaging. Here is a good example that FDA has provided about levels of packaging. The base package, of course, is the lowest level of the medical device. Here they have used the catheter as an example. I definitely, we recommend that you keep this for yourself on helping you once you're at the stage to deciding on how to obtain your barcodes with your provider, and you explain to them if you have higher packaging, if not, and if you don't, if you're only putting out there the base package and only need one DI. But if you believe you have higher packaging, this is a great example to follow. Shipping containers do not require UDI. Shipping boxes do not require UDI. We know some companies like to add barcodes to their shipping boxes, but that would be for tracking purposes on your end for inventory or anything else you want to track it for, but that is not submitted to the GUDID. So as I discussed earlier about the GUDID, so the GUDID is a publicly searchable database, and it's administered by the FDA that serves as reference of all of these DIs being submitted. As of June 2019, there were approximately 2 million entries in the GUDID. The registration or account is needed, no registration, is needed to search for these information on the products. Once you have a DI, you can just enter it in there and search it, and you will find some of the production information, anything that's public. Not everything will be public. Here's an example of a device label. We know not all labels look the same, but this is an example of one. And if you look at the bottom right there, you see where it says unique device identifier. This is a good example where you see that the DI plus the PI is there, and you see it in machine readable, you see the barcode, and then you also see that it is human readable. On this slide, this is a good slide to also keep for reference to know the mandatory questions that are, these are all mandatory, but anything in red can also indicate that a new DI will need to be created. These are the mandatory questions that we're entering into the GUDID for each of your DIs, for each of your UDIs. But the red ones, just keep in mind, these can trigger for a new DI to be created and submitted. For example, if you have a product and the brand changes, that definitely means you need a new DI because that's now a new brand. So the one you previously had in the GUDID, we could enter end of distribution date. You're no longer distributing that product, and then a new DI must be entered, and of course all the new information that goes with it as well. So now I will pass on with Dr. Marco Thiebold, where he will be discussing the general exemptions.
Thank you so much for the information. We are stepping ahead with the general exemptions on the UDI regulations. So the first point is a finished device labeled and manufactured prior to the compliance date has a grace period of 3 years. So just today ends the grace period from 2016, where all Class 2 devices that were manufactured before the compliance date could be sold without a UDI. Only the products that got an exemption or an extension on the regulation compliance date, there is a couple, we will see that later, still are able to be sold without a complete UDI. Then the next point, devices used solely for research, teaching, or chemical analysis and not intended for clinical use do not require a UDI. That applies also to custom and investigational devices, individual single-use devices. Also, a combination product with an NDC number is exempt. All veterinary devices, if it is for veterinary use only, devices intended for export. And as we saw before, there's also the exemption for shipping containers, which do not require a UDI. If you decide for tracking purposes it would make sense, then you are free and you can definitely add also a UDI to the shipping container. Now, Class 1 devices have additional exemptions. FDA was really trying to make it as easy as possible for the industry. And so there is an exemption for Class 1 devices that do not need to include the production identifier into the UDI. Class 1 devices that bear the Universal Product Code, the UPC, on their label and device packages are not deemed to meet all UDI label requirements. Labelers of such devices would still be required to comply with the requirements to submit data to the GUDID. Class 1 devices that are exempt from the Good Manufacturing Practice, the GMPs, are also exempt from all UDI requirements. There is a list on the FDA webpage, and we have also a link later on here where you can double check if your products are GMP exempt. So again, if your product might be GMP exempt, like here in the US, toothbrushes are also a medical device, but they are GMP exempt, you do not have to comply with the UDI regulations. We heard earlier that FDA extended the compliance date for Class 1 to September 24, 2020. We also have heard a little bit earlier that there is a grace period for devices of 3 years that are manufactured and labeled before the compliance date. Here is where things get a little bit tricky. So FDA did not apply these 3 years grace period to devices that are manufactured and labeled after the compliance date of 2018. So all devices that are manufactured between 2018 and next year, September 2020, do not have that 3-year grace period. That applies only to your manufactured and labeled devices prior to the original compliance date of 2018. So these devices do not have to comply or to bear a UDI on the label before September 24, 21. If you still would have devices, products in stock after September 24, 21, yes, after that date, a UDI has to be applied to your stock before you can sell it here in the US. And there's another extension for Class 2 devices that FDA granted. So all these devices are exempt from or extended from their compliance date originally in 2016 to also 2020. That is the all the product codes that fall under that extension. But this extension is also granted under conditions. And so that applies only to the retail of these devices. So you have to sell it over retail. If you sell it directly to a hospital, then that exemption is not granted to you and the UDI would be required on it. But for the retail, yes, the background on that is the industry asked for an extension because in the retail environment, not all scanners and not all software products that are used in that environment can really work with an UDI code. The industry likes to use the UDI code just to have one barcode on the package or on the label that they can use. And the difference between a UPC code and the UDI code is that the UDI code is 2 digits longer. And so there are still needs to be make some changes technical wise. And so that is the main reason why FDA extended that compliance date. Nevertheless, you are still required to supply your UPC code into the GUDID, and you also need to update your device master record with that information so that everything is in load or in record in case of an inspection. FDA made also some enhancements to the FDA GUDID database. So, for example, unlock DI records for edits after grace period. What that means, we heard earlier that all the red fields or product information fields like the brand name or the model or version of a device are UDI triggers. And in the past, FDA closed these fields. So you were not able to make any changes to these fields after the public date. You had to reach out to the FDA and to ask FDA to reopen that record for you. For example, you had a typo in the brand name, you overlooked that, so you had to reach out to FDA. FDA had manually to go back to open that record. You would make the changes, the corrections, and then the record would published again and also sealed again. That was a lot of work on the FDA, and so FDA decided to give you the power also to unlock these DI records and to make changes to that. Also going with that, FDA also tracks changes of these entries. So there is a public history for every DI record, how often that record was changed. Another point was for GS1, it's one of the accredited agencies. It's only for GS1 barcodes that you are using. There is a check digit, and that check digit will now be validated in the system. And if there is a discrepancy in that, then you will get an email notification from FDA and saying that the check digit failed for what reason ever. Also, there's a public release of 510K numbers and PMA numbers since last year. If you go to the GUDID database, this information was not be shown in the public database before last year. And actually this year in March, also the grace period changed. Grace period means you have a publication date of your information in the GUDID, and let's say you submit your information today, and you have a publication date of October 1st. In the past, before March this year, that was 30 days. So plus another 30 days, your record would show up in the public database. Now FDA changed that from 30 to 7 days, so it will now show up after a week. You have only 1 week now to do additional changes if you see there was maybe an error in some of the information that you like to have in the database, and make corrections on that on the easy end before they really get public, because after that, every change that you make will also change the DI record history with an additional from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, depending on how many changes you have there. Another big point are kits. So FDA has, unfortunately, 2 guidance documents about kits. There's an older one from 1907, and that actually, if you compare both, they conflict a little bit in the statements. But we will not talk about the older guidance kit, because this is more a general about kits. We would like to go and to talk about the Unique Device Identification Convenience Kit guidance document, and going further with that one. So a convenience kit, per FDA definition or the regulation, is that you put together 2 or more different medical devices packaged in one container, and it is for the convenience of the user. The FDA interprets this to mean a convenience kit is a device that contains 2 or more different medical devices packaged together and intended to remain packaged together and not be replaced, substituted, repackaged, or sterilized, or otherwise processed or modified before being used by the end user. I just have here one example for it, and it's a first aid kit, a retail first aid kit. Usually you have multiple different medical devices in these kits packaged together for the convenience of the end user. And they are intended to remain packaged together and not be replaced, substituted during or till they are getting used. If a UDI is on the label affixed to the container that has all these different devices in it, then you are in compliance with the UDI regulation, because FDA says a first aid kit is a convenience kit. So not every single device in the container itself has to be a UDI. Just one on the container is sufficient in that case. However, if you decide as a labeler also to sell single devices to restock that first aid kit, let's say you have a gauze package or a Band-Aid, that device might have the burden to have an own UDI, but that depends also, as we said earlier, if it falls into the GMP regulation or requirements or not. For example, if you just have a Band-Aid, Band-Aids are usually exempt from the good manufacturing practice. You still can sell it without the UDI. Other devices in the kit might really have to have a UDI on it. It depends on the good manufacturing practice regulations here. You have to really look close into that. Another example would be a non-sterile orthopedic device set or kit, a collection of non-sterile implants and reusable instruments intended by the labeler to be placed into a sterilization tray for cleaning or sterilization before use. So only a few of the implants usually are used, and unselected implants and instruments are usually going back and re-sterilized and reused later on. That kind of a set or kit is not a convenience kit per FDA definition, because it is sterilized prior to use. So that means each device must comply with the UDI regulation and has to have their own UDI, even if they are in a kit and kind of used by an end users, but they need to be sterilized before the use. So this is not a kit or set that FDA classifies as a convenience kit, and you would be okay with just one UDI on the outer label. That is not happening with that kit. And we have also another specialty that FDA has in that guidance document. A labeler packages one teething ring of each of number of models or variants shipped together as a fixed quantity to create an item for retail with a higher profit margin, or to allow each end user to select and use a particular teething ring. That is not a kit at all. What we are talking about here is really a package configuration. So different devices that are packaged together for the convenience of the user, kind of a collection where you can choose from, does not really fit the definition of a kit. So we have at least three different kind of kits here. We have the real convenience kit, like the first aid kit that only needs one UDI on the label. Then you have kits that are not a convenience kit, so every device in that kit itself needs no own UDI. And then you have also what's called a package configuration. So you need really to look in what kind of kits what you have, how they are used down the road to make the right decision to comply the best and easiest way with the UDI. I can only tell you to look into that guidance document. There are more examples. I don't want to extend it too long here, but there are more examples that might be helpful for you to make the decision what is the right way for you to work with these kits. So here is a summary of what we call the roadmap, what you have to do to get in compliance as easy as possible. The first thing is a DUNS number. Most companies in the US have a DUNS number, even if you might not know them. If you reach out to us, we can definitely look it up for you and can double check if you have one. The DUNS number is required to get that GUDID account. The difference between the GUDID and most of you are aware of the FIRLS account that you have, where you have your company registration and listings of your products. That can be set up by you. The GUDID account is set up by the FDA. So you have to file an application for an account with the FDA. And to really set up the account, FDA is using the DUNS number. So that is really the first mandatory thing that you need here. A second thing is the GMDN. That's the Global Medical Device Nomenclature number. It can be replaced with what FDA calls a PT, a preferred term code, because GMDN is a nonprofit organization. If you don't know your nomenclature numbers, you would have to pay a fee to that nonprofit organization to look them up. But there's also the possibility when you have your GUDID account to use a preferred term code from the FDA. That is also a mandatory information that you need. Then, of course, you need your UDI. You need to contact one of the FDA accredited agencies and to work with them to get your barcodes. Then you need to collect all mandatory device information. We had that earlier on the slide, but that is only showing, sorry, the mandatory ones. There is a total of 55 fields. Most of them are voluntary, and FDA really likes to have as much information as possible. But as we said, only the mandatory ones would be required to save a record or to publish a record of your products and devices. And then you have to submit that information into that database. And last not least, the update of the label with the UDI barcode. Here are some UDI resources, links directly to the FDA webpage to make it a little bit easier for you to look up regulations for questions that you might have. Yeah, they're more like the UDI, GUDID Resources, unique device identification, the convenience kit guidance document. So if you have any questions to that, that might make things easier for you. That is what we as Registrar Corp can do for you and how we can assist you. We can guide you through the FDA's requirements with all your questions. We can also submit your device information to or into the GUDID database. And we can also act as your mandatory regulatory contact for UDI. And we have here some general remarks because we are just 1 week away from the renewal period, which starts October 1st. So you have to renew your registration. And the FDA USER fee for 2020 was raised up to $5,236. And we often get that information or question about, we heard there's a small business deduction. Unfortunately, that small business deduction does not apply to the user fee. It only applies to applications like 510K, 513G, or PMA, all that kind of applications. There, a small business reduction fee is possible, but not on the user fee, unfortunately. One tip, if you go into your account after October 1st and you just want to do a fast listing of a new product code, that might not working because FDA is setting that software into a special mode after you have done all the work and short before saving the information, the software will ask you for the PIN PCN number as proof that you already have paid the user fee. So without that, you can save part of the data, but you cannot really publish the data. So that's a little bit thing you need to have in mind if you do something after October 1st. And that is just a reminder that FDA has also a software that's called FDA Compliance Monitor. It's a very nice software that gives you information about recalls, import alerts, warning letters, inspection results, import refusals, and valid FDA registrations. So FDA has all these databases, but it's very time intense to look up all that information per company. So Registrar Corp has a software where you can get all that information combined for multiple companies You can set up companies that you like to watch. If you are a US importer, for example, and you have different manufacturers, you want to avoid any hassle at the port of entry with shipments, that is a software that can help you to keep track of possible setups at the port of entry because of maybe import refusals in the past or warning letters in the past that even sometimes companies, especially if you are not a US company, are just not aware of that FDA has something on record. So that is a software that can really help you. Going to the next one. And that is how it looks like. If there is really something, if everything shows green, it's nice. There's nothing. If there is something that FDA has on record, it is indicated. And any change to that, you would get automatically an email. There's also the possibility, if you are interested in that kind of software, to schedule a demo with our specialists on the monitor system. They can show you the software. They can better explain, as I can do, how it works, or what are the advantages of that software. And it's for free. So just, if you're interested, use it. We have also here a little overview, additionally, to the medical device area, what services we all provide. Just picking some like EMDR submission service. So if you are already Registrar Corp customer, or for free, we will really every EMDR report through the gateway on your behalf. If you need help with that, because to establish that gateway is for smaller companies really a challenge, because you need a lot of IT knowledge. It's a lot of testing back and forth. So we have that. We can assist you with that. We have a detention assistance. If you are already on the red list, there are possibilities to get you off that, back on the green list. Just an overview of what we can provide on service to you.
All right, thank you both for that great presentation. Again, I'd like to announce that we will be sending a recorded copy of this webinar and a PDF copy of the presentation to all registrants. You may still submit a written question by using the Ask a Question feature in the top center of your webinar screen. Okay, so first question. If I cancel my FDA, my current registration, for next year's payment, is it still then possible to reapply for a registration the next year, or am I then excluded for a registration until 2021?
No, I can answer that very easily. You can reactivate your registration anytime. You don't have to wait till October. So if you do not, for example, you are a US importer, you do not import for the next year, you don't need a registration. But as soon as you start importing again, and as that, you can do that anytime. We can definitely also help you with that and re-register with the FDA.
If a product is packaged and sold as a convenience kit, does it need to have a specific DL for that kit, or just for individual items in the kits?
With DL, I think you are talking about the device listing number. So that is another tricky thing, because not for every kit that the industry has or provides, there is really a device listing or a product code for it. So you can only create a device listing number if FDA has a product code for that kit. In some cases, it's not really possible because there is no product code for a kit. So in that case, you would need to list every single device that is in that kit. In regards to the GUDID, in the GUDID database, you can definitely make it clear that all these devices are packaged together as a kit.
Okay, next question. If I wish to cancel my renewal for the upcoming year, can I still reapply during 2020 for the same year?
If I wish to, yes, you can do that. Just to make you aware, FDA does not give you any kind of a break on the user fee. So if you do your renewal for 2020 on October 1st or on March 31st next year, it will be the same number. It's still the 52.36. There is no reduction on the fee on the FDA end for that.
Okay. Can a company register with FDA after October 1st?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
Okay. Is there a difference on UDI requirements for the European MDR versus FDA's?
Actually, there is a lot. And I think the most common is that the European Union makes the manufacturer responsible for their UDI system. There's a couple of additional ones. I didn't really prepare for that. But if you send me an email, I can definitely give you a little bit more information on that too.
Okay. Can you explain the implementation of UDI to software-only medical devices?
Yeah, also software might really require a UDI on it. And what the regulation says, the UDI needs to show up when you start the software. And if you have really improvements of the software, new versions of the software, then also a new UDI would be required. It's like a model change on other devices. So, but that most likely applies only to standalone software. If you have software that is used to run a device, then usually, for example, if you have an ultrasound system and you are making the software for an ultrasound system, both is sold together, both is usually cleared under 510K together. So in that case, you don't need special UDI just for the software. It's only for standalone software.
Okay. For devices exempted from GMPs, do you not have to be listed in the GUDID? Is this correct?
Correct. If your product is GMP exempt, you are not required to comply with any of the requirements of the UDI or the GUDID.
How long is the UDI registration process?
The UDI process to comply with FDA, it can be different from company to company. It all depends where you are in the process. Do you already have the barcodes, or do you have to start from scratch and contact any of the 3 agencies provided before? If you already have the barcodes, the process can be about 1 or 2 weeks. It all depends on how quickly you provide the information to us so that we can submit it to the GUDID.
We are only a contract manufacturer for parts for medical devices. Do we need to have UDI numbers for our products?
Parts is kind of a tricky thing here. It depends if these parts would be defined by FDA as an own medical device, and if you bring these devices in commercial distribution or not. If you would say to both statements no, then there's no requirement or anything you have to do in regards to the UDI.
Okay. May I unlock the DI records only for corrections, or may I also use it for entering changes on the product, for example, brand name?
FDA says no to that. So if you have a typo in your submission, you are supposed to, or you are allowed to reopen the entry and to correct that. But if you really have a change on the brand name, then that brand name requires an own UDI entry, because per understanding of the FDA, it is not the same medical device. It applies also to changes on the model. So you have a new model, a new version of a model, same thing. You are not supposed to use the same. For example, you have a Model A, you have a UDI. You are not supposed to reopen these entries and put now the Model B under the same UDI. It should have an own one.
Okay. Is UDI and GUDI registration required for sunglasses with UV protection as well?
Yes. So sunglasses, frames, reading glasses, all of these devices are not GMP exempt, and so you have to comply with the UDI regulations on that.
We are out of time, but you can send us additional questions anytime by email to info@registrarcorp.com. This concludes our presentation, and thank you for joining us today.
Are those questions saved?
Usually, yeah.